boy, oh boy. It's not every day you get to talk to a drum idol, but that is certainly the case with today's guest. And that guest is the one and only multi-instrumentalist and uber-dynamic drummer in Brendan Canty. Brendan played with such monumental bands as Rites of Spring, Fugazi, and many more, in addition to doing film scoring and soundtrack work. And you know, as I was growing up listening to Fugazi records and then seeing Fugazi live, it was really an electric experience and incredibly inspiring event that definitely altered my paradigm of what music was, of what punk was, and was really just an exemplary case of not caving into external influences or the industry if you feel it's a sacrifice of what you hold to be true. And in that sense, it was a very raw and honest representation of one's art, and I'm glad to have witnessed it growing up, as it was, in my opinion, the evolution of punk rock and the unwavering belief of one's creative pursuits. But we get into the new band with Fugazi bassist Joe Lally, called the Messthetics, the evolution of Fugazi's records and acknowledging your back catalog without repeating it, which is obviously quite a task. Brendan's love for Gretsch kits. I mean, he's only had 2 of them all these years. Touring then versus now. How the industry has changed. Brendan growing up and seeing Minor Threat and the Bad Brains. How he fell into soundtrack work, plus some fatherly advice as well. And unfortunately, on a sad note, one of my childhood friends and fellow drummers passed away as I'm reading this, so the world not only lost one hell of a character, but it subsequently became a less interesting place in his passing. And as cliche as it may sound, some lights burn brighter than others, and we can only celebrate the brief moments we spend in their presence. So you will be missed, Ram Plessala. Rest in peace, and rock on, my brother. This episode is absolutely dedicated to you. So tragedy aside, I hope you enjoyed this interview as much as I enjoyed doing it. Brendan Canty, ladies and gentlemen.
Crowds go mad with joy. Give the drum a
Well, I'm here with one of my favorite drummers, Brendan Canty. Brendan, thanks for sitting down with me. How you doing, man?
Good, man. My pleasure.
Absolutely. It was great seeing you back up on the stage with Joe Lally the other night, the Fugazi rhythm section back in action. Do you ever hear that song Peaches and Herb reunited, and it feels so good when you sit down and play with Joe sometimes?
Of course. It's the they're from DC.
Are they really?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't even know that. That's amazing.
Yeah. One of them, I think Peaches. I don't know. Who was the guy? Herb? That must have been Herb.
I would think it was Herb, although it'd be pretty hilarious. Herbert is actually my dad's name, but it would be pretty amazing if his name was actually Peaches.
I think.
But, yeah.
I think Herb became a cop or was a cop before that. I somewhere I heard that story. We were just talking about them the other day.
Oh, that's funny.
And Van McCoy, who did Do the Hustle. Marvin Gaye. DC's got a lot. DC's got a lot, man.
Damn, man. Well, speaking of that show that I saw you, it was at St. Vitus there in Brooklyn, and the Messthetics, that is the new band. Tell me a little bit about that project, and by the way, who was the guitarist? Because he was ripping.
Yeah, he's amazing. That's Anthony Parag. He's a DC guy. He grew up in the suburbs of DC, and I started noticing him about 5 years ago. He kept showing up and doing like mostly kind of noise stuff, honestly. Like I always notice people that are like a little bit like Nels Klein, you know. Do you know Nels at all? He's in Wilco, but he used to open up for Fugazi a million years ago in LA, but it's a guy, you know, he's like incredibly well like trained per se, with like a lot of beautiful intuition and improvisatory skills and stuff, but he's also like gravitates towards noise, you know. So and so I just always loved Nels Klein for that. And when I started seeing Anthony show up and play, I mean, he's 15 years younger than I am. He's like 35.
Uh-huh.
So he started showing up and playing, and I just started like kind of seeing. I started seeing through the noise bits and going like, oh my God, this guy can pretty much do anything. And he also is, he's got he's really versatile, but he also has really great taste and stuff. And so I brought him in. He and his wife at some point to do work on the ending of one of these films I do, these Burn to Shine films, where I burn down. I put bands in houses, and then I burn down the houses or destroy the houses.
Oh,
and I'll send you some clips. They were stuff I did a long time ago, but one of them I had in the can that had never been finished, and it was the Atlanta one. So we finished it, and we about a couple of years ago, and I brought. I was just looking for a soundtrack to the demolition of the house, and I usually all do it myself. But then I had seen him play, and I'd seen his wife, who is this amazing cellist, Janelle Lepin, and so then I brought the two of them together, and we immediately were like, "Well, shit, that was really great. It really, really worked. We did it in about 4 takes, watching the video, and it got to where it needed to go. We definitely vibed and got it to actually, we improved upon it a few times. Then we nailed it the 4th time, and I was like, man, that is, he's really got my respect. And then he was also really, he liked my playing too, and so we've been sort of trying to work together since then. And about the same time, Joe Lally moved back from Rome. He'd been living in Rome for 8 years.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so we hadn't been playing. Every once in a while, he'd be in town, and we'd get together and jam or whatever. But it wasn't until he moved back to from Rome permanently that I decided that I was like, let's try to play. And we were playing like his songs, which were really cool, but they were quieter, And then while we were playing that, I said, well, let's try it with Anthony, and we brought Anthony in, and we were playing on Joe's stuff, and it was a little bit, trying to have Anthony play along with the quieter stuff. So at first I was trying to get, Anthony to sort of fit into Joe's world a little bit, which was a little, Joe's world's a little quieter, but we just started writing together, and then Anthony brought in some stuff, and the thing just started to get louder and louder. So, and I just, we said, well, let's just try to write a set of music, write a record. And that's sort of what we just started writing. And this is, and Anthony, he just had a lot of ideas, and the louder it got, and the more we pushed it, the more we got to know each other, the more it was like, we ended up, digging on, things like Sonny Chirac and stuff like that. And we were like, just all found this like common place that was more experimental, and that works with me perfectly. And the fact that we don't have a singer, I am not having any problem with it right now, because it's like things are moving really quickly. We can write things quickly. A trio, the 3 of us together has been really, really fun. Obviously, it'd be great if we had like Guy singing or something like that. It'd be fantastic. But it was, but I love that the pace at which things are going. The communication is wide open. We're all like really happy playing with each other. Joe and I are really happy playing loud and trying to keep up with Anthony.
Yeah.
Anthony's really happy to play loud and have the 2 of us with him. So, and the shows have all been going pretty well, man. We're just starting. We just like haven't played but like a dozen times, and just finished our record. It's coming out on Discord in late February.
Very cool.
And we'll just see what happens. We're just going to be kind of taking some runs up the East Coast, going out to Chicago, going down to, Atlanta, Nashville, those kind of things. We just played a bunch of those places. So
yeah,
we're just going to be playing throughout the spring, and just hope that the initial burst of creativity can keep going.
Right.
Basically.
Right.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely, man. It was cool. I don't know if you ever heard any recordings of it or not, but I actually saw Joe Lally. He hooked up with the guitarist Yanni Papadopoulos of Stinkin' Lizaveta,
Right, yeah.
and my buddy Andy Preen, who's a drummer in the band Suplex down in New Orleans. And I actually saw that band down in New Orleans many moons ago. So I was telling Joe when I saw him on the gig that I was at that gig, which kind of blew his mind. But it's kind of interesting because while that was more improvisational, there are some connections there in that it was dynamic, but it also had a ripping guitar player in Yanni from Stinkin' Lizaveta. It was interesting.
Yeah, I would have loved to seen that. I love Yanni. I love Stinkin' Lizaveta, and I like that kind of thing a lot. I mean, I really. I like instrumental music, and I always like the Dirty Three, and I like big, bombastic, stretching out kind of stuff,
right.
I mean, it is like allowing it to be dynamic and allowing the tempo to come and go and allowing things to slow, that all makes a huge, for me, it's really liberating and really fun, and I actually feel like, this is something like, I mean, I don't know if it could have happened with anybody else, honestly.
Right.
I mean, there's something kind of magical, honestly. I hate to use that word, but it's like there is something magical about like Joe coming back and meeting Anthony and like this. It's like when things click, they really click, but it's hard to recognize that when you tried a bunch of different things and you played with different people, and it's like sometimes it just feels like pushing a rope, and you're like, why is this hard? And you're kind of beating yourself up, and then it's like, oh well, maybe it's just the fact that you need other people, the chemistry and collaboration has to be right, for it to work. I think that's the feeling with this, is that it's feeling pretty satisfied right now because it's working.
Right.
But the big test will be if we can fit it, once this record comes out, if this is all we can ever write, or if we don't ever really love anything else we ever do, then we'll break up and do something else. But for right now, this feels like I don't want to say effortless, but it's exactly what I needed.
Anytime but now, anywhere but here, anyone but me. I've got to think about my life. We are consumed by society. We are obsessed with variety. We are all filled with anxiety. We're one not divine. We gotta put it out, put it out. We gotta put it out, put it out. We gotta put it out, we gotta put it out, put it out.
So going back to teenage Brendan, in the 80s, whether it was, I guess, with Deadline or Rites of Spring or One Last Wish, playing with Guy Picciotto in the last two at least, what was life like for you back then as a teenager, first starting to play shows and record with these bands?
Well, I was just a teenage kid. I mean, I was 16 to 17 years old. I was pretty young.
Yeah.
Failing out of school most of the time.
Right.
Being not particularly sensitive to my parents' needs. I had a large group of friends. We were all just like, would go to shows. I mean, I started like in the proper like hardcore music, and like going to see Minor Threat and all those, or the Bad Brains and all that, pretty young.
Right.
DC's an easy place to be young. It's an easy place to get around. You can get on a bus, or you can even walk to most gigs. Mm-hmm. And there was a really, thriving, I think by ninth grade, as a freshman in high school. I mean, I started listening to stuff and going to see stuff, in junior high, but really in ninth grade, which was like, 1980. If you ever saw the Bad Brains in their heyday, when they first started, or Minor Threat,
Yeah.
But mostly like the Bad Brains were like something to aspire to. And it really felt like the scene here, I don't know about the scene, but the bands here and just what was happening in general in music, like really was actually something revolutionary, musically
right.
revolutionary. And so I had this horrible fixation with it, if taken from my parents' perspective. Like I liken it to like if it was 1967 and you were living in Berkeley, you'd probably be out in the streets or protesting at People's Park, even if you were 13 years old.
Right.
It's the same thing, like being in DC and having all the punk rock shit hit all at the same time. Like I felt like I had to go and do that stuff,
Yeah.
I mean, so I just, got a band together, and you don't play every night. That's not necessarily what you're doing, but you are making music a lot, with each other, practicing. We had bands practice, like the Faith practice in my basement. A lot of different bands practice in my parents' basement.
Oh boy.
We had a big big house full of kids. There's 7 of us in my family.
Wow.
So we had a big kind of chaotic, it's kind of a chaotic situation. All my older brothers and sisters were hippies. And so, my parents they're pretty relaxed about things, to be honest with you. They were kind of, artistically inclined anyways.
Right.
My dad was a piano player, but he's mostly a writer. Pretty great, pretty righteous guy, but
Cool.
He didn't like punk rock. He didn't like punk rock at all, but he was at least tolerant, and he like bought me my first drum set. So it was definitely supportive, but I didn't necessarily repay it. I was looking back at some of my journals, and I'm like, good Lord, I was a pain in the ass. Just as a teenage punk rock kid. I was like just cutting classes. I mean, I'm writing that I haven't been into this one class in 2 months. This is in high school, where I'm just like I'm just literally not going to certain classes. So I'll go putz around the neighborhood, during certain classes and go to other ones. And it's just not a good scene.
Right.
But musically, after sort of moving on from like proper like hardcore and super fast stuff, like in like Deadline or like the times of like Minor Threat, stuff like that.
Right.
We got into Rites of Spring, and then in Rites of Spring, like we were all, really, really close, and we hung out together all the time, and we had joke bands on top of even the serious bands. We had joke bands. Like we'd go see Thief of Baghdad and come home and make a record called The Band of Baghdad. We'd just like make up songs about the movie or whatever. We had a fake psychedelic band called the Brief Weeds.
Wow.
Which we played all the time. We even played live a couple times, but just tons and tons of goofy joke bands, and then tons and tons of playing in our parents' basements and writing songs, and some great shows along the way.
I bet.
So yeah, it was a really supportive, thriving scene. Everybody was straight edge, or we were not. We didn't call it straight edge, but nobody drank or did drugs. So
right.
We went bowling a lot. We were super goofy. We seriously, it was a funny place to grow up. But I really love it. I mean, all my friends, I felt like were really pretty brilliant and creative and lovely. And people like Guy and Ian, like I've actually been friends with them that long. We've been friends since 81, 82.
Wow.
So I know we're still really tight,
That's awesome.
Like Guy and Ian and Joe and I, we all, we still, right, just not only stay in touch, but see each other all the time. And our new record's coming out on Discord. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess so. In the 80s, you had the bands that you mentioned there, and then I guess towards the tail end of the 80s, you started doing Fugazi. And I always really enjoyed the melodic bass style that Joe employed with that, and then that coupled with your groove, y'all made such a great rhythm section. What were the influences at that time when Fugazi was starting around? Was there any particular local bands or beyond that, or because it's interesting. I think DC, while not necessarily known as a drumming town, seems to really produce some pretty killer drummers, whether it's go-go stuff or punk rock or whatever. There's so many styles styles, R&B, all of it. But what were y'all listening to in the early days of Fugazi?
There was a certain amount of dub stuff happening back then. You know, I mean, there was like the Ruts, the singer for the Ruts died. They started Ruts DC, and Ruts DC, and we all loved Ruts DC.
Huh.
You should listen to them at some time. But they put out a record called Rhythm Collision, which is it's like a rock band doing dub.
Oh, cool.
Just great players playing great music. There was all the guys in Generation X had a band called Empire that we really liked. That was kind of obscure and kind of cool, beautiful kind of record. There was some, early PIL stuff that I was kind of into, which is kind of like rock/dub stuff, and that's really good. And then, I'm just these are all just off the top of my head. And then there were, bands like Tackhead and all the On You Sound stuff that was coming out of England. So that there was a lot of like dubbier stuff that was coming out of England, and there was that and all the, not to mention all the kind of cool Jamaican reggae dub stuff, the King Tubby and all that stuff that was coming out. Like all that stuff influences you. You bring that stuff in. I'm trying to think if there was anything like even more along those lines that were, like tight rhythms,
right,
underneath the noisy guitar business,
right? Exactly.
I think there was like Gang of Four was kind of doing a lot of that stuff. I mean, we all worked at record stores, and and there was a lot of records coming out back then,
right?
And you'd pull stuff from some of those records. Like there's a band called Shriekback that we listened to, or that I listened to. But we all kind of listened to different things, and so it all just like comes through in your writing.
Right.
You have to you just have to kind of write towards the things that you're into. But the main and like a band like The was doing amazing sounding stuff, production wise. Some of the early Scritti Politti stuff, just like really early Scritti Politti stuff, is on the stuff on Rough Trade. Cool. Was really influential to me. That they actually have the song Messthetics that I named my band after.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, you should check them out. You like those early things on Rough Trade are really cool. They're dubby, they're weird, and people like Jaw Wobble were putting out records, and people were putting out really atmospheric, strange records,
Right.
And that's the kind of stuff we were gravitating towards, but we were also like into song structure, into like, it doesn't have to be like verse, chorus, blah, blah, blah. But while you're in the process of writing songs, you have to respect the fact that, that you're going to have to play it every fucking night. Right.
Right.
And so you have to kind of write towards the future in that way, right towards, the best of your abilities. Mm-hmm. And sometimes we wrote ourselves into a corner and made things too tricky, even for, mostly for the vocals. But we in Fugazi, we ended up just like, just fucking sitting in a room for weeks and days and months and years, just trying to piece things together. And
yeah, sometimes
it came quickly, but usually what happens is you come up with a part and you jam on it for the whole day. And then you get together the next day to come up with another part, and you name those parts, and then you start stitching them together eventually and turning them into songs, and then you throw them away.
Right.
And then you
Here comes another problem, all wrapped up in solution. It's ugly as it's strapped on, twice as hard to get behind. Another sufficient fight, lost again, please let me get my hands on it.
Man, it's funny. I love hearing the process of all that. But it's such a different world we're in now as opposed to the years when you were doing Fugazi, in the sense of just the whole internet, social media, cell phones world. And I have a funny story to tell you. So I got to see Fugazi, I think 3 times. Should have been a 4th time. But unfortunately, because as I said, pre-cell phones, internet, etc., when there was a lot of word of mouth stuff going on with your shows, me and my friends drove up to Lafayette from New Orleans. So it's a 2-hour drive one way. We showed up on a Saturday night or something and then realized y'all were playing the next night. So we drove back, and then we drove Sunday to see y'all and pulled into the parking lot right when y'all finished. So we totally missed y'all 2 nights in a row.
Oh, fuck. That sucks.
It's a total, it just reminds me how different a world it was then,
Yeah.
And when you look back at all the shows that you played, for instance, like what were probably the most shows y'all played within a year when y'all were touring really heavily?
About half the year, I guess. Be about right. Maybe 150, I guess. I don't know.
Looking back on those shows, does it fascinate you that y'all were able to coordinate all that stuff and tour as much as you did and make it all happen?
Well, Ian is amazing,
right,
in that way, and I think it is like really, it's all about relationships. Ian knew he did it all himself, and he reached out to people, and I mean it is amazing, without the internet. I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean,
it's crazy.
I think it is crazy. I think, Ian just, he had all these connections from Minor Threat, and things were happening then but it's really not, it's different. And like the nuts and bolts of all this stuff are relatively the same. And okay. So there's 2 ways to book shows now, right? You can either get a booking agent and they'll call up and they'll say, we'd like to hold, September 15th as our day coming through your town.
Yeah.
And they say, well, we have a couple other people going through this, but we're going to put you on, you're going to have you on the second hold. So we have one person ahead of you. If they drop out, you get to keep it. And then if you drop out, then we have a third hold that can take it, blah, blah. Anyways, it's just first, second. You have to get in this queue of bands because there's so many goddamn bands.
I know.
That you have to get into a queue of bands and then work it out. And then you have to haggle. And there's this whole process. It's a little mind numbing,
right.
And it requires a booking agent, honestly. Or I guess it does. I don't know. I've done it both ways at this point, but I think it's also totally possible, or at least for Messthetics, it is to call up some friends and say, hey, where's a good place to play? And then they say here, and you call them up and you say, hey, we'd like to play there. Is that cool? And they say, sure. I don't know. And that's sort of the way, you think about destinations where you want to go and what would be an interesting way to get there. It's not that different,
right?
Honestly. I don't think it has to be that different. I don't think recording has to be that different. In a lot of ways, I mean, it's nice to be able to record yourself because it's free.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, you could. It's sort of like if you take a computer, you can chop shit up and make it a computer record, but it's also possible to turn on that record and use it like a multi-track recorder and record everything live. I mean, most of the Messthetics record is just one or 2 takes, totally live, and that's part of what I love about the band is that we like that aspect of this band. We like it to be squirrely. We like it to be like we're on a tightrope, and it's kind of like, we actually have to do it.
Right.
There's no chopping shit up and fixing shit, really. I mean, we do a couple places where I fixed a couple things, but most for the 95% of the record is super live. So I'm just saying, all I'm saying is that everybody has a choice about how they want to book their tours. Everybody has a choice about how they want to record their records.
Yeah.
And it doesn't necessarily have to be all that different. The best part about it is that you can actually book a tour and I can write and tell people about the shows. I mean, that's fucking phenomenal that so many people came out at St. Vitus. And then same with Hoboken was great too. We had a good crowd out there too. So, to me, that's fantastic.
Absolutely.
If you were to ask me, I would say the internet has at this point is like a net negative, but
Yeah, I hear you.
but I hate it.
Yeah.
But and it's ruining everything.
Right.
But having said that, there are some good things about it.
This one's ours, let's take it over. This one's ours, let's take it over. This one's ours, let's take it over. This one's ours, let's take it over.
Here's one for you. I talked to a lot of guys on this podcast kind of and just sort of pose the question like as to how they define punk, quote unquote. And I usually use Fugazi as a reference for sort of the evolution of punk because I thought in listening to your records throughout all the years that no matter the song, whether it was a slower, almost ballad-like song with, and y'all always had the great dynamics and everything, that there was sort of this tangible punk-like aspect to it, despite whatever the particular style of the song was. So I thought in that sense, it was sort of an evolved punk aesthetic sort of. And I guess my question is, was that a conscious thing? Did you put it, did all the songs go through like the punk rock strainer, so to speak, or was it just a byproduct of everyone's background and having all of that, that early, punk and hardcore embedded in your DNA?
I think it's probably more incidental than anything, I don't think it's as intentional. I've actually made records that are way too produced, that's not, it's not. So I think whatever it is about the Fugazi records that you like, it was probably a direct response to our previous records, to each other's tastes.
Uh-huh.
A lot of the decisions that were made in Fugazi were made because in an internal dialogue.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think there was much referencing of the outside world.
Right.
Per se.
Mm-hmm.
If there was, I think our records would sound, production-wise, really different on each one. Now, having said that, we did always, we were actually working in with our own catalog in our heads all the time.
Right.
Like you'd say, oh, well, we can't play that again, As much as I'd like to, if we'd like, we can't write Waiting Room 500 times
of
or
course.
whatever. You can't do that every single time, and so you have to kind of like, keep your bullshit detector on and be like, yeah, it ends up being a lot of work, and the longer you're in a band, the longer it takes to make a record because you're trying not to repeat yourself.
Right.
So that's that makes it all really difficult. Being in a band for a long time, that became difficult. And also there were a couple times like Steady Diet of Nothing is one of my favorite records, but it doesn't sound very good. And it would, we tried to do it all ourselves. And
yeah, I'd say it's the rawest of all of the Fugazi records to my ear.
Yeah, it's not like mega produced. We didn't spend enough time on everything, really.
Uh-huh.
You kind of learn from that. So then in the next record, and in on the Killtaker, like we went up and tried it with Steve Albini, and that was again sounded great, but we didn't spend enough time on it. It didn't feel like a Fugazi record. Anyways, it's all a process. Then we came back and actually used the studio and started, did overdubs and like spent time making sure the vocals were okay.
Right.
All that stuff. I really wish my biggest regret would be that Steady Diet didn't turn out to be a better record, than it was, because it was on the tail of Repeater,
right,
which we were really happy with. And then I was really happy with the songs on Steady Diet, but then part of it was we weren't using Ted Nicely on the recording, he had helped us on the production of our first record and on Repeater.
Right.
And then he came back and helped us on Killtaker. We also had switched studios. We were still working with Don Zantara to Inner Ear, but he moved studios at that point to a bigger space. So we were all getting used to the new monitoring and the new system. And I think there was a certain just, newbie kind of, like I just don't think I was ready to like take the reins on that record. And I think I was, it didn't feel like I was doing all the right things production wise for that record.
Right.
We needed a little bit more hand holding at that point. We were also fucking touring like constantly at that point. So I think there was an internal hope that we could just shit gold.
Well, it's interesting, man. With In on the Killtaker, to my ear, and in looking at the chronology of the Fugazi records, In on the Killtaker seems like it was kind of a shift, not necessarily production-wise, but I feel like in songwriting-wise, I feel like that was a shift that then would continue into Red Medicine and each successive record. But do you feel that In on the Killtaker was sort of a switch or a shift in the band at all?
Yeah, I do. Yeah, but I mean, I think that, like I say, that all came from the knowledge that we had sort of screwed up on Steady Diet,
Right.
That we I mean, that's tough. I mean, one of the things that makes a great band great is that they keep making records that are better than their last record.
Right.
And we just didn't do that. We didn't do it on that one. But although those songs we ended up playing most of those songs, every single show we ever played, they really did become like a backbone of our set.
Yeah.
I mean, we played all our songs all the time, but those we gravitated towards a lot of those songs.
Yeah, it's interesting. The Steady Diet of Nothing was actually the first Fugazi record that I heard, so that was my reference point, and then I went back to Repeater and to the previous EPs. It was, I do really, still to this day, I think those songs are great, and I always loved hearing y'all play them when I would see you live.
There's nothing waiting, there's nothing imminent, nothing forgiven for your young idea. There's nothing waiting, there's nothing imminent, nobody seems surprised to run away, return home, son, to your own mirror. You're such idea. Rock 'em on, mistakes shown. Guess what we were doing while you were gone.
You put out In on the Killtaker, Red Medicine follows. That's when I feel like some of the production sort of increased, or at least like more effects on guitars and different production stuff. You know what I'm saying? Because everything was so kind of raw prior to that. Was that a product of just giving yourselves more time in the studio to develop that, and then that in turn developed those songs that then you would go on to play live?
We never really spent very much time in the studio, I think the most we ever spent was a couple of weeks.
Wow.
So for the most part, I mean, we spent a lot of time writing those songs in the basement, or wherever we were writing them. We were together at least 3 days a week for like 5 hours at a time.
Right.
And that ends up being a lot of time that you're working on stuff.
Yeah.
And maybe more like 4 hours. But
Right.
anyways, it was still plenty of time. So when the songs were kind of finished, they, you kind of knew what you wanted them to do. And then once you got in the studio, you kind of experimented with them to a certain extent, but none of it was very belabored, we just basically got a good, did most of it live, and then did some overdubs. So it's none of it's rocket science, but I do think that, I mean, it could have been also we were trying to, like, live, we stretched things out a lot. So it could have been us trying to respond to things the way they were being played live, but it also, I mean, I think, going back to what I was saying before, that it's more like a response to the things that you previously put out and your desire to grow as a band in some way. And so doing that, requires, growing as a band requires kind of change in the inherent and experimentation. And I think that's basically where all that is, where that comes from.
Viva, viva, viva la violence. Viva, viva, viva threaten and say, hey, we want a violent stop. No more in a loving way. Hey, we want a violent stop. No more in a want it right away. Right away.
Now, drumming-wise, the kit that you're playing with the Messthetics, that appeared to be the same red Gretsch kit that I saw you play throughout the years with Fugazi. Was that the case?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I had another kit before that was like a '64 Gretsch that I still have that I played on, waiting room and repeater and stuff. That we toured with, and then in '89. I think it was, I bought this kit, and I've had it ever since.
Wow. The original Gretsch kit that you had, what's the story with that kit? How did you get it?
My dad bought it for me in, like 82 or something like that.
Wow.
We went out and bought it out of the newspaper.
That's awesome.
For $250.
Wow. That's unbelievable.
And with all the cymbals. It's a beautiful kit.
Wow.
I still play it all the time. Those are the only two sets I have. I don't use that one came with a Rogers Dynasonics snare, but I don't use that. I use a Lidwood Coliseum most of the time. That's kind of tuned, kind of cranked up pretty tight.
Where did the bell come from?
Guy bought it for me for my birthday one year. He just got it from like a flea market.
Really?
I used to use a bunch of different percussive tools like circular saw blades and pots and pans and trash and stuff.
Nice.
And then we were touring around a lot and playing in small clubs that didn't have, and squats in Europe that didn't have PAs, and so the nuances of all those little percussion instruments weren't coming through at all. But I still like the sound of other things than just acoustic drums. And so and so anyways, he bought me that, and I've used it ever since. It's made the cut year after year, although I wasn't really using it until I started playing loud again.
Right.
I have another band called Super Silver Haze, which is just me and this guy Doug Kalmeyer and his wife Monica, who does video. And the three of us, so he's the one who really got me to start playing loud and live, and improvising more. Nice. And then when I started playing loud again, I started bringing out the bell, and it's I love the thing. Takes me back. So my setup right now is pretty much the same as I've ever had. The same snare and same kit as I've ever had.
Right on. Yeah, if it ain't broke, don't need fixing, as I've heard said before.
Yeah, exactly.
Nice, man. Drumming wise, I know for the argument, you added an additional member playing percussion and even doubling up on the drum set. How was that process, working that out?
I think that started earlier. It started on that song Closed Caption, which is on, I don't know, it's on either End Hits or Red Medicine. Yeah. And that it started when I just was writing with a drum machine. And so live, he was on tour with us. Jerry Busher was on tour with us. He was in a band called Fidelity Jones. Okay. And he was our roadie for years and years, and he was there, and he's a great drummer. And so I said, well, why don't you play this double drum part? And so the two of us would just, he'd lay some down down the drum machine part, and I would be able to riff over top of him a little bit.
Right.
And so then because he was along, we just started, sort of writing towards that.
Right.
I don't remember exactly about like on the argument if I know he wasn't in the room when we were writing stuff, and I don't exactly remember where the double drum stuff came from, in terms of his, but then those ones he did record with us in the studio on all that stuff and played all the double drum stuff with me live. But it was one of those things where we'd have it reserved for like in the middle of the set, he'd come out and play like, 4 songs of all the double drum stuff.
Very cool.
So there's nothing that crazy or revolutionary,
Yeah.
but it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. Soundtrack work and scoring and whatnot. How did you get into that?
I got into it through my friend Kurt Sianga, who was a producer over at Discovery Channel. He hired me to do a show called Buildings, Bridges, and Tunnels. It was very simple, and I was, a new dad. I guess that was 20 years ago.
Huh.
I was a new dad, and he offered me, he's like, "Do you do soundtrack work?" And I go, "Yeah, sure."
Nice.
I had never done it, but I was just doing it with like a reel-to-reel, tape deck and a stopwatch because computers weren't around. But then as soon as computers got to, kind of caught up to Pro Tools, I learned Pro Tools, and then Pro Tools started having video inside of it, and so you could sync things up, and
right.
It just it's something. Part of it is that I have kids and I need extra income, but part of it is just I like it because it's like you're sitting around. Like even when I wasn't, before I was doing soundtracks, I'd spend a lot of time making 4 tracks and write and just writing riffs and things like that. So to me, it scratches that itch as well. It allows me to like write riffs and record and do the things I love, but also get paid for it. And I like working on documentaries because the directors are smart and the subjects are usually pretty good.
Yeah.
I like the process. I like it. I've done like 4 feature films this year. I've done I had a show. I was on National Geographic. I did that show Hard Time for like 4 years.
Cool.
13 hours a year. I've done bunch of like just tons of like one-off movies and TV shows. And that's a blast. I pretty much do everything myself, honestly.
Right.
I just, I have my studio all set up. Everything's mic'd up and recorded, and I just basically do the old mad scientist thing and just grab something and lay some stuff over top of it, grab an EBO, lay some feedback, and put on some piano, and I don't know, just kind of mix things up.
Very cool.
Mess things up. I love the process.
Yeah.
I love working with the directors. I love having, in that situation, the film and the director, mostly the film and the images and the sequence that they're trying to convey is the singer. That's like the collaborator. You're trying to support the basic arc of the concept that they spend all their time putting together, shooting and then editing. So it's a pretty clear directive, and I like knowing what the mission is, and so
nice.
That's what I love about it.
Oh, you're so to die.
Well, you mentioned we were talking about kids earlier. I'm expecting my first come February.
Congratulations.
So as a father that has 4 kids yourself, you got any advice for me, man? What can I expect here other than sleep loss initially?
Well, I mean, as time goes on, you realize that what like totally independent beings they are, even from the very first. So they're just really they get smarter, they get more interesting as they grow up, and they have I would just say don't expect them to like the stuff that you like.
Right.
Make sure that they know that they're allowed to have their own punk rock,
right?
Have their own music, have their own aesthetic, choices and lives and interests, and try to learn from them.
Right. Okay. Well, that is some good advice. Before we go, I did want to say I went down to my dad's recently down in Louisiana, and I was digging through some stuff, and I pulled up a drumstick that I caught from you. I've only caught one drumstick in my entire life of the thousands of shows that I've been to, but I caught it from you at the New Orleans Music Hall show on the Steady Diet.
Oh wow!
The Steady Diet of Nothing tour. So I have one of your drumsticks.
What was it? Is it a ProMark 5A?
It absolutely is.
Okay. I still play 5As.
That's amazing.
But there was a time I used to play 5Bs. And then, so if it was a 5B, it would have been a really early stick.
Right, yeah. I you know what? Honestly, I don't remember the exact gauge of the stick, but I got to go back and look at it. But it is funny that I got this one drumstick that I got from you that's pretty chewed up from hitting your the bell.
That's funny. Yeah. Send me a picture. I'd love to see a picture.
Absolutely. I will send you a picture. Cool. Well, Brendan, thanks so much for sitting down with me, man. It's been great talking to you. Growing up, I've said it before, that you were kind of like my Ringo growing up, in the sense that you just taught me a lot about musicality and dynamics and rock drumming. So thanks for that.
Oh, thanks. I really appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for talking to me, man.
Anytime, Jody. Been an absolute pleasure.
Cool. Thanks, man. Many thanks to Brendan for talking to me and being one of the nicest guys on the planet, and to the Messthetics for putting on such a great show. And I definitely look forward to the new record coming out soon. Be on the lookout for those dudes. Also, I have a new sponsor that I'll be announcing in the coming weeks in New Orleans Record Press, which is the first full-on record production plant in New Orleans history, which is insane, and I'm super excited about it. And I'm excited for many more good episodes to come, and I hope y'all enjoy them. Now I'm going to go get some goddamn sleep. Crash, bang, boom!